Hey guys, welcome back to another video with the 2001 RM250 that I've been working on, this bike back here. Today's gonna be a lot of fun. We'll be working on the rear shock, getting it all back together, and also doing some coatings. I'm excited to see this one come together, so let's get after it. So this is where we left off in the previous video. If you haven't seen it, I will have it linked up in the corner of the screen right here. So basically we tore the whole shock down, cleaned everything up, did some coatings, brushed up all the aluminum parts, basically just got it ready to go back together. So we're going to start off with the shock shaft, getting everything assembled on here. Now these are the parts I'll be replacing on the shock. We have a bumper, a bladder, and an oil seal head. Now what's nice about these is they just come complete, ready to drop on. However, you can just replace the seals on the old head. Usually these aluminum heads don't really wear out, but it is just so convenient and actually pretty affordable just to replace the entire head. So that's usually the route I go. This one is from Pro X. And we have a shock bumper from Prime. This one's all blacked out. No more brown or yellow bumper. And the bladder is just an OEM KYB part. A few other things to look at for wear would be the band on the piston. Now usually these last a while, although I have seen them wear out before. If the band is bad, I'll usually just replace the whole piston. So this one looks good, we'll reuse it. And in the process of taking all this apart, you have to grind the nut on top of the shaft here. So usually those get destroyed in the process and you want to replace that. That's just a hardware store item. As for the rest of it, I will have it linked down below in the description for you guys. Before I start sliding things onto the shock shaft, I like to lay everything out in the order it'll be going on. All right, let's start popping things together. One last thing you want to check over is the threads on the end of the shaft. Make sure there's no burrs left over and the nut spins on smoothly. So first up we have the bumper cup, then the bumper itself. Just push this all the way down. Next is the end cap for the body. And for the oil seal head, you definitely want to use a seal bullet. This just prevents the seal from tearing on the sharp edge right here. And of course you always want to lube up your shaft and your holes. Gotta be like nonchalant about it. Lube up your shaft and your holes, you know. If you run it dry, you risk blowing her out. So lube's always a good call. Seal head is on. And then we've got the piston and shim stack. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a shim stack before. It's made up of all these individual little washers. It's actually pretty crazy looking at it. There's stacks on both the top and bottom side. Look at all that going on. I do not envy suspension tuners. Basically just kind of wiggle the shim stack on. And as you're putting this stuff on, just make sure it's not getting held up by any burrs. Seems like it's all going on smooth. So when people say they have their suspension revalved, what that mostly consists of is changing out the individual shims here for the rider's weight or riding style. Also, you could change out the piston itself and also spring, oil, height. There's a lot that goes into it, but valving itself is typically changing out these shims here. So different thickness shims and different diameter change the way the oil flows through the piston and through the shims. So there's a lot more to it, but that's kind of the basics. Now we're gonna top her off with a nut. You wanna use a red Loctite on this, such as the 271. These definitely need to stay in place. If this nut comes loose, your shock is literally just gonna completely fall apart. And the torque spec for this nut is 25 foot-pounds. Golden. Now one last thing as just a little security to make sure this nut doesn't come loose is to peen it. That is basically putting a punch mark against the nut and the shaft here. Just run a punch in there and give it a little tap. Need something with a little finer point on it. I don't know, it's kind of a deep pocket there for anything to truly peen, but that red Loctite either way should hold it into place. We are gonna move on to the shock body and get this assembled. First up is the compression adjuster. So if you saw the video where we disassembled the shock, you would have seen the compression adjuster come apart when we took it out of the body. So these things just simply snap together. A little O-ring down inside here that kind of holds it all together, and then it just sits here in the groove. So you simply just snap it together. It's good to have the low speed compression turned all the way out. For this, it just goes to get a little easier. Gonna get a little oil on these O-rings before I thread it into the body. And the torque spec for this guy is 21 foot-pounds. Now you can stake the adjuster into place if you'd like to, just grab a punch and tap it, but it isn't completely necessary. Those will stay in place just fine. So having the adjuster turned all the way soft will allow oil to flow from the reservoir to the body a little easier. And that is what we're gonna be doing here, filling the reservoir up, and we'll be using some Maxima 3-weight shock fluid. We're gonna go about 3/4 of the way up. You should see a little bit of oil flowing from one side to the other now. It also helps to cup your hand over the reservoir, just kind of pushes oil through to the other side. You can also tap around the compression adjuster. That'll help loosen up any bubbles. And you can see the fluid went down quite a bit from cupping it. I'm gonna fill this back up to 3/4. Cup it a few more times. Now we need to get the new bladder onto the bladder cap. Just put a little oil on the inside to help it on. Make sure it snaps in to the groove all the way. Now this is gonna get a little messy. You wanna either put a drain pan or some rags underneath of the reservoir area. We're gonna slide this in. You're gonna have oil pouring out. Actually, we're gonna spin this around. The valve stem should be facing the other way. Just gonna give this another go and push it all the way down. Just basically get it pushed down far enough to get the circlip in. Looks like we'll be able to get that circlip in now. You should hear it snap into place, just like that. Make sure you have your valve stem core into the cap. Now we're gonna put 50 PSI in the bladder just to seat the cap against the circlip. Now we're gonna fill up this side of the body about 1 inch from the top. And then grab your shaft and stuff her on in. We're gonna push this all the way to the bottom. You'll see a lot of air bubbles coming out. Once again, this gets pretty messy. You wanna have a drain pan and some rags handy. And then slowly pull it all the way back up. Just make sure you keep the piston under the oil at all times. Oh, I just sucked in air. You have to compress that again. Just keep a close eye on it when you get to the top. We're gonna fill it up a little bit more. Now, how we're gonna bleed all the air out of the system is by compressing and pulling it back on the shaft. So the best way I found to do this is to compress the shaft fast. That'll open up the valving, basically opening up the shims and allow air to escape. And then when you're pulling it back out, you want to go really slow. So slow out, and then just give it a good push when you're going in. And you'll see some bubbles coming to the surface. So do this about 4 or 5 times, maybe 6 or 9, until you don't see any bubbles left over. It's looking pretty good so far. All right, that should be good right there. A few other things you can do here to make sure there's no bubbles trapped in here. Tap on the body, kind of around where the piston is. That'll break up any air bubbles maybe trapped inside the piston or shim stack. And then once you're done bleeding about 4 or 5 times, you're gonna wanna push the shaft in fast all the way to the bottom and let it sit there for about 15 minutes, and that'll hold things kind of under pressure and hopefully work out any bubbles that are left in there. After letting the shock sit for a few minutes, I'm gonna pull the shaft back up, top it off with oil, and then slowly work down the seal head. So you'll notice right here, there's a little bleed hole. You wanna keep an eye on that. That'll allow air to escape. Just hold constant pressure on there until you don't see any more bubbles. So push it in until it doesn't go anymore. And as we're holding pressure, we're gonna let a little bit of air out of the bladder. Just enough to get that seal head into the body. Just go until that ring for the circlip is exposed, and then we can just pop the circlip into place. Get that seal head down as far as you can. Expose that groove, and looks like it snapped in all the way. Nope, a little bit more on this side. Just make 110% sure that clip is in the groove. Looks like we're good. The last thing we gotta do here is tap in the end cap for the body. Now you'll notice there's a hole on either side, 180 degrees apart. You want those holes facing front to back. That way when dirt and water get inside of here, it allows it to drain out. If they're facing side to side, doesn't really drain out super good. And just use a rubber mallet to tap this in. Man, that is looking so clean. A lot of neutral colors, but as soon as we get that spring on there, it is really gonna pop. If your vise isn't all nice and oiled up and you're done bleeding your shock, you ain't doing it right. There's really no way to avoid the mess on this one. Now we'll need to fill up the bladder with nitrogen. Finally bit the bullet and got myself a setup here. Just a 40 cubic foot tank. Got a gauge on there, and then a race tech gauge. This just threads onto the bladder cap and makes it super easy to fill it up to the desired pressure. You need something to regulate the pressure down to a lower PSI because these tanks are around 2,000. This will bring it down into, I don't know, under 1,000. And then this will get you to the exact pressure you need. Now you could just do away with this gauge and just use a air chuck, although I think these make it quite a bit easier. I actually haven't used it yet. Now, I'm sure some of you guys are wondering why use nitrogen instead of air. So nitrogen is completely free of moisture, and that makes for better on your components, doesn't cause corrosion. Nitrogen is also a lot more stable. Under pressure, it'll hold up better. It's not affected by heat. It'll keep its pressure for a lot longer. That is the main reason behind using nitrogen. It's kind of the standard here with shock bladders. Now these setups are a little pricey, but it is super handy to have if you're doing a lot of shocks. The tank was around 100, the gauge was 170, and the race tech gauge was 120. All these I just got from a local welding supply store. The hose was additional 10 bucks or so, and then the race tech gauge was from Rocky Mountain. So it took me a minute or two to figure this out. I have never welded in my life. I'm pretty dumb when it comes to welding tanks and welding gases, but basically it's pretty simple. You just open up this valve to let some nitrogen into the regulator. Can bring up to about 1,000, and then this is what regulates the pressure coming out of it. And so you just crank this in. It's like basically a spring that regulates the pressure. And then coming down to the shock gauge, this is the valve that lets air in. Basically just thread this onto the bladder, and then you can use this little Schrader valve on top to let out pressure if you go a little too high. So just double check that your core is tight, and then you want to let out any air. Now on the race tech gauge, we're gonna make sure the inner thumb nut is threaded all the way out. Just get it going straight. Thread it all the way on down. Make sure it's snugged up. And then this thumb nut here is going to compress the core, and that'll allow us to add nitrogen into the bladder. Now, as soon as we turn this valve, we'll start adding nitrogen into the bladder. And when you turn it, you wanna listen for any leaks, and we're gonna go up to 140. That is the spec for this shock. I need to come up to the top, add some more pressure to the regulator. Forgive me, I'm just a complete noob when it comes to this stuff, but we'll get it figured out. See if that'll get us up to 140. Right about there. Then we're gonna thread out this outer nut, and then just thread off the gauge off of the cap. Seems like it works pretty good. I'm gonna grab just a tower gauge and see if it's actually 140. I don't know if this gauge even reads the 150. It says 117, but lets a lot of pressure out when you check it. So I would rather just trust this gauge right here. Seems like it's pretty accurate. I'm just gonna get it back up to 140 and call it good. All right, that is good. So the biggest advantage I see over using a gauge like this over just an air chuck is you can really dial in the pressure, and then you don't lose a bunch of pressure when you go to check it with a gauge like this. And it doesn't seem like it bleeds off any pressure when you remove it from the cap either. So overall, seems like it works pretty good. If you guys are interested in picking one of these up, I will have it linked down below. Now, if you guys don't have a setup like this tank here, you can always drop your shock off at a local motorcycle shop, and it's actually pretty cheap, maybe like $20, $25 just to have a shop do it. And of course, we gotta top it off with some bling. A little blue anodized cap here, looks good. With the shock all charged up, we're gonna make sure everything's working properly here. Gonna compress it, make sure it is nice and smooth, and then check the rebound. Feels really good. Let's adjust this rebound and see if we can slow it down a little bit. Yep, looks like that's working good. Now at first there is gonna be a little bit of oil coming off the seal head, just because there's so much oil when we assembled it. That's completely normal. So we're gonna set the compression adjuster back to just the standard settings for now. I'm gonna go all the way in, and we're gonna go 2 full turns out. It's a little easier to do with a ratchet. That is 1 and 2. And this is 7 turns out from all the way in, or 7 clicks out. 5, 6, 7. And for the rebound, this is gonna be 11. Again, just turn it all the way in, and 11 clicks out. All right, that's just a good standard setting, and we can adjust it later. Now we'll need to drop in a new upper bearing. Got this one from Pro X. So usually I have dry ice on hand to cool the bearing down and makes it easier to drop them in, but this time I don't, so I just use the freezer, had it in there for a few hours, and then I'm gonna heat up the top of the shock here. Now we don't want to torch it too much, just because of the Cerakote here. Throw a little grease in here. At the very least, we'll just try to get it going in straight. Yeah, we're gonna have to bring this over to the vise. Gonna use a little abrasive wheel to clean up this bore here. We're gonna give this another try. I popped the bearing back in the freezer for a few hours. See if it'll at least get going in straight. There we go, that's a lot better. I'm gonna bring this over the vise and push it in the rest of the way. I'm gonna check and see how centered it is. If you wanna get real technical here, you can measure it with a pair of calipers. 355. 344, close enough for me. Last thing we gotta do is just pack this bearing full of grease. Use the spacer to kind of spin that grease, and then pop in a seal on either side. Get your collar in there, and then pop in the collar on the other side. And that is it. And if you guys are in need of shock bearings or even like swing arm bearings, linkage bearings, I will drop a link down below to where you can find these Pro X parts. All right, guys, the shock itself is done, and now we're gonna move on to the spring. Been really looking forward to getting this thing coated. Now to strip off the paint, we'll be using some paint stripper here. This is called Aircraft Remover. You gotta be really careful with this stuff. It is really strong, and like the can says, if you use too much of it, you'll just see aircrafts falling out of the sky. So make sure you are well protected while you're using it. We're just gonna brush it on. And it also helps to put the part in a Ziploc bag. That just helps keep the product on the part itself and prevents it from drying out. After a few minutes in the bag, you can see the paint starting to bubble up a little bit in some areas. I'm just gonna start wiping it down, wipe as much of this off as possible. Definitely wanna wear some gloves and some eye protection for this. Now there's definitely stronger paint strippers out there, but they are just so expensive and kind of tough to get your hands on, and they're a lot more dangerous than this stuff here. But this will at least get the paint softened up a little bit, and it'll come off with either abrasives or sandblasting. Then I'm gonna go ahead and wash off the rest of the paint stripper. Then we're going to bust out the bench grinder. We've got a rough cleaning wheel from Prime. This will quickly rip through a lot of this paint. A lot of the paint came off with some buffing. The rest of it, I'll just have to sandblast off in the cabinet. And in case you guys missed it in the last video, I am doing a big giveaway on the store over the next few days. Figured I'd show you what I got going on here. I don't know if I showed you guys this before, but this is the inventory over in the office. So I've got a couple bins and some stuff on the shelf here that I will be doing a giveaway with. A lot of this stuff during inspection didn't come back perfectly. And like I've told you guys before, I don't like to sell things unless they are just absolutely perfect. So some of these wheels came back just a little bit wobbly or had some minor just cosmetic defects, like a little groove in it. They still function just like normal. They're perfectly fine. And so if you would like to grab either a flap wheel or maybe a cleaning wheel, I've also got a bunch of die grinder wheels here. So if you'd like to grab one of these wheels, just head to the store, primemx.com, and add $25 worth of merchandise. We've got a bunch of abrasive products, Pro X parts, shirts, tools, stickers, list goes on and on. Add some of that to your cart, $25 worth, and then click on free items. And the flap wheel and also the cleaning wheels will be on this page. I just haven't added them yet. Click on the item you'd like, select the options, buffer, shaft size, the grit, add it to the cart, and you are good to go. All right, happy shopping guys, and thank you for supporting Prime, really appreciate it. Just finished up sandblasting the spring. Let's see how it turned out. Looks pretty good. So we are using 100 grit aluminum oxide in here. That's kind of the standard for powder coat and Cerakote prep. So the process for powder coat is pretty similar to that of Cerakote. We're going to soak this in acetone for 30 minutes, bake it through the oven just to burn off any contaminants or oils, and then just pretty much spray it out and then throw it back in the oven for curing. So we've had the spring in here for about 30 minutes. We're just gonna spray out the first coat. Damn it, Nick, bike's in the way. So we're actually doing a two-part coating here. We're gonna spray down the base coat, which is gonna be a chrome, and then the color is gonna go on top of that. So the color we are using first is called a Super Chrome from Prismatic. And the gun we're using is a good old Eastwood OG gun from like 10 years ago. So when you hear a powder coating, it literally is just powder that you bake onto the part. So instead of a liquid, just a powder. And somehow that turns into a chrome on the part. Always good to have a water filter and a regulator on your gun. Good idea to have some sort of respirator as well, or at least just wear a little dust mask. All right, so you want to start in the areas where it's kind of tough to get into, like the inside of the spring or some of these pockets here. And it's pretty much just as simple as pushing down the button as you're shooting. And after you're done spraying, you can grab a flashlight, look over it, make sure you got everything. Now that we're all sprayed out, we're just gonna pop it into the oven. So on the first coat, it's pretty simple to get full coverage. You just pretty much spray it on and the powder just sticks to it really good, so you don't really have to worry about it too much. If you're doing 2 coats, the second coat is a little trickier, but I'll show you how we can go about that. So as you can tell, the top coat is going to be a blue. This is called a Dazzling Blue from Prismatic. And if you guys are interested in doing a color like this, I will have a link down below. Prismatic always has the cleanest colors out there, and they're super easy to apply to. All right, let's go check on that spring real quick. See what we're looking like. Oh yeah, she flowed out. So now we're just gonna set the timer for 15 minutes. Countdown's on.
Oh, that looks freaking
Probably gonna frickin' break the lens on it. Frickin' Jeff Alessi.
It looks sweet.
Laser pointer. 84 degrees. All right, our 15 minutes is up. Got our handy little oven mitts here. Ooh, she's smoking a little bit. But look at that freaking chrome. I usually don't get too amped about chrome, but that's looking pretty sweet. So the second coat is gonna be a little bit different here. We're gonna wait for the part to cool down a little bit, but not all the way. And it's a little trickier getting the second coat on just because we don't have as good of contact with the part as we did with the first coat. So we're gonna need to spray it a little bit warmer, and that will help that powder stick a little bit better. So we're gonna basically let it cool until the rack is cool enough to touch by hand. So with the second coat, we're gonna spray it at a lower pressure, just try to get less powder on there. If you do a lot of powder, it'll actually create like a darker finish. And so instead of blue, it'll be more like purple. So the reason why we do a chrome base instead of just going straight to the blue is because the blue is actually transparent. That's what makes the color pop so good, is because you have the chrome underneath, which is obviously really reflective. Then you put the transparent blue on top and it just looks money. So kind of a lot more work with two coats, but the outcome is definitely a lot better. All right, so I was a little off. Powder wasn't really wanting to stick, so I'm gonna put it back in the oven. Spent too much time talking to you guys. We're gonna give this another try. Definitely gotta spray it a little, had to spit all over the part. Yeah, I might have got too much powder on there. A little too purple. All right, how we looking? A little darker, but probably look good out in the sunlight. They got a little purple hue to it. All right, this is what we ended up with. A little darker than my liking. That color could have been a really, really cool lighter blue, but this is how it goes sometimes, to live and learn. But nonetheless, I think it'll look really good on the shock. So let's bolt her up. Alrighty, let's pop her on, see how she looks. That definitely pops pretty good there. I don't know, I was tempted to redo this color, but I'm actually kind of digging it now. And then to get the bottom collar on, just slide up the bumper. And we can squeeze the collar right in through here. Put it up against the bumper cup. And that is pretty much it. Now at this point, we can just tighten down the preload nuts. You think what I'm thinking? Let's bolt that up on the bike. Wish I could ride it already. I'm taking too damn long on this thing. We're just gonna mock it up, see how it looks. Oh shit. That Cerakote almost goes like perfectly with the color of the frame. Looks kind of crazy right now with the yellow and the blue, but trust me, it'll all come together as soon as that indent drops in there. Not bad. I think I might just look at it for a while. Why don't we roll it out in the sun and get some thumbnails for you guys. Now, the last time I powder coated a spring, I noticed a lot of questions and concerns over running the spring through an oven, whether or not the heat would affect the strength of it or its ability to function as a spring, and also if the powder coating would flake or chip off as the spring compresses. Now, I have powder coated a couple springs since then and haven't had a single issue. I've ran them on bikes and got some good hours on them. Never had one single issue. Powder coating holds up just fine. They don't function any differently as a spring. And actually, there are spring manufacturers that do powder coat their springs, and I have owned some of those springs and never had a problem with them. They still function just like normal. So I thought I'd bring that up and share my experience with it and hopefully that silences some of your guys' concerns. Well guys, that was a lot of fun putting the shock together and doing some powder coating. It had been a hot minute since I did any PC work, as you can tell, but as soon as I got this thing outside and saw the color on that spring under some sunlight, I'm pretty happy with it now. But appreciate you guys watching the channel and supporting. It really means a lot to me. I'm having a ton of fun with this RM series. And quick reminder, if you're not signed up to win the RM when it's all finished up, you can do so by clicking the link down below in the description. And also don't forget about the giveaway happening over at the store. Head to primemx.com and snag some of those cleaning and flap wheels while they're still available. All right guys, till next time, keep it prime.